You're
Okay,
mute.
everyone, welcome to today's AP Hug office hours. So today we're going to go over the first little chunk of Unit 3. A lot of teachers will draw out Unit 3 to be like a 2.5 month unit, which is just so wrong, which is just, I don't know. Anywho, we're not going to go on that tangent right now, but we're going to cover the first chunk of it, and we're definitely going to be done with this unit by the end of the semester. We're definitely not going to talk about Unit 3 in January until we get to March and April and we start studying for the AP exam. Okay, so first things first, I just wanted to show our student hub again and just be like, you can get all of the stuff here. The link is just fiveable.me-AP Hug Student Hub. So I'll type it in, it's super easy. Fiveable.me, but like with the number 5, /AP Hug hyphen student hyphen hub. And then boom, it pops up for you and you can look at all of the wonderful stuff that I have in there. So let's get started with today's actual AP Hug stuff. I will put the slides on here when we're done with this, but not yet. Okay. Let me see. I think I have to fix the recording. 1 second. Here we go. So today we're talking about concepts of culture and the cultural landscape. This is the beginning of AP Hug Unit 3, and if your teacher talks about the course and exam description or the CED, this is like the first four-ish key topics. So the first thing we need to talk about is what is culture? So basically, a lot of textbooks will have slightly different definitions, but just looking at a definition of this is pretty useful in my opinion. Looking at definitions of things is useful in general in AP Hug, but here it's actually something that you should recognize and try to figure out what each word means in this definition, why it's there. So it's the total sum of knowledge, attitudes, and habitual behavior patterns shared and transmitted by members of a society. So it's kind of confusing, but it's really not. So it's just talking about what is your society think, what do they know, and what do they do? So when you look at attitudes, that's what they think, knowledge, that's what they know, and habitual behavior patterns, that's what they do. So basically you have all of these things they're exposed to, and then on the image on the right I have the heart, and it's basically a lot of things that are involved in the culture of India. So you can see the sari that I very much butchered that, and I'm so sorry, that the woman is wearing on the bottom right. You can see the cow because the cow is a very sacred animal in the religion of Hinduism, and you will probably learn about that in a few weeks in your AP class. You also see a sitar and the Indian flag, the Taj Mahal, an elephant, some Hindu characters, a snake because snake charming is actually a thing. And what else? We see a chakra. There are a lot of other things that I can't identify here, but this is a really great. Oh, also, you can see the symbol for the Buddhist religion right there. That little wheel with the brown and blue, that symbolizes Buddhism because that's another religion that actually was born in India. It's not very prevalent there anymore, but we're talking about the diffusion of culture in 2 weeks from now. On our stream 2 weeks from now, we're talking about diffusion of culture and language. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, but it's basically just summing up the culture because it's summing up the knowledge, attitudes, and habitual behavior patterns. So knowledge we could talk about here as being the knowledge, the way that they built the Taj Mahal, the emperor. You can talk about the attitudes being how they feel about the animal of the cow, the elephant, chakra, snake charming, and habitual behavior patterns. It's just like that. What do they do with their stuff? And that's a lot of what culture is. And now let's look at folk culture versus pop culture. So this is something I talked about in one of the short videos that we did, but I think it's worth discussing again, just because it's a pretty definitional thing that could actually show up and be important somewhere. So folk culture is often small, homogenous, rural, and tradition prevails. And that just means that these group of people do the same thing and they've done this same thing since the dawn of time or whenever their culture started. And it's a small group of people. They don't usually live in cities or suburban areas because those are largely influenced by pop culture, which we'll talk about in a second. And homogenous just means everybody's very similar. So one of the easiest examples of folk culture is the Amish people of Pennsylvania. So let's see how they can fit every single characteristic that I've given. So we have another person joining, so I'll give 1 second. Hi, welcome, Jason. Right now we just discussed like what is culture, and we're talking about like folk culture and pop culture now. So feel free to ask any questions that you have as I'm going through this. So like I was saying, the best example of folk culture is just going to be the Amish people, because they check every single one of these boxes. It's not it's a small group of the US population. It's a small group of the Pennsylvanian population. They're very homogenous in that they all very much look the same and do a lot of the same things. Like they practice the same religion, they wear the same clothes, they don't use technology. And you can also see that with tradition prevails, because when you're looking at the Amish, you see that they don't like modern technology a lot, and they like traditional ways of doing things like cooking, moving around. They don't love cars. And they are also very much rural. They don't live in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. They live in rural Pennsylvania, everything in the middle. And then to the complete contrast of that, we have pop culture. It's large, it's heterogeneous, it's everywhere, urban, suburban, rural, and it's constantly changing. So literally the exact opposite. I even chose opposite looking bullet points for this one. So for pop culture, we're talking about it like being a large amount of the population. So like everybody loves to talk about pop culture as being fashion or music or TV or movies or any big industry ever. So like everybody likes to do these things, and it's constantly changing. It's always adapting to where it's going. So when we talked about diffusion in unit 1, and I think we talked about diffusion for like a minute today, not very long, but when we get to talking about diffusion in this unit, especially when we get to language and culture in a few weeks, we're going to be talking about how things change when they move, and they move everywhere, and then they change to adapt to these places. It's a really important distinction to think about. So the examples of pop culture are like fashion. So it starts in Milan. It has that hearth, which is what we talked about in diffusion. And basically Milan and Paris, like they have these fashion trends that just like reach everywhere, and they change like every season. Like you have fall fashion and spring fashion, and it covers a large population of the globe. Like that fashion from Paris will reach the United States in New York Fashion Week, and it'll reach LA. And you'll also see it like covering urban, suburban, and rural towns. Like you can see the classic suburban fall Christian girl fashion, wearing Ugg boots and drinking pumpkin spice latte. And you can definitely see that in suburbia America. Like this pop culture is literally everywhere. And you can see this when we're talking about the cultural landscape, which is, I think, my next slide. No, actually, it's in 2 slides. The cultural landscape. Suburban cultural landscapes like often look super, super, super similar. Like I could be in random suburb in Texas. Let's say Richardson, Texas, and it's gonna look the same as like a suburb in California. Like everything looks very similar because of how much things have globalized and traveled around the globe. So, fun fact, I lied. The next slide is the cultural landscape. So, the cultural landscape, this is the slide with the most text, I promise. It's the material character of a place. So, we're thinking back to the 5 themes of human geography here when we're talking about place. So, we talked about the difference between location and the difference between place, because place is more of that sense of feeling and that sense of distinction of somewhere than it is of location, which is just where something is on a map. So we see this material character of place incorporated with human characteristics to represent the impact of the culture on the physical landscape. So I bolded some like important terms here that you just can get out of it. And you can see culture. We just talked about that term. Material character, you can talk about your class when you get a vocab quiz or whatever. You'll look at like some vocab words, and one of them is going to be like material culture. And it's just going to be like traditions that are passed down, books, clothes, everything that's material. And then the physical landscape is just like the cultural landscape minus the culture. So you can look at the physical landscape a lot when you're looking at like rural America, because there's not a lot built up there with the culture. I mean, you can actually examine it to be like, there are all these cornfields here. That means there are farmers here. And that's their culture. That's what they do. They are farmers. And then think back to determinism versus possibilism. So when we're talking about environmental determinism in Unit 1, or maybe you're learning it right now, we can talk about that the environment determines human actions and what culture settles somewhere, whereas possibilism is the exact opposite. So does anybody want to chime in, and does anybody have anything to say about like how determinism or possibilism is related to the cultural landscape. So I can shut up for a minute.
Well, possibilism is when humans like determine environmental impact on their life. So like some cultures, they are like heavily involved in with like what the environment does for them. So like they live off of the land like intensely, and they like do a lot of sustainable action.
That was a great explanation, Hannah. Great job. So when we're looking at possibilism, you live off of the environment. So that's a cross between possibilism and determinism, because if we use the Amazon rainforest, the tribes in the Amazon rainforest, for example, we can talk about they're possibilists because they're changing the environment as they go. They're cutting through vines to travel through, and they're eating off of what they have. But you can also say, well, this is determinism because the environment's like they can eat this or this. They don't have any options. They can't go to McDonald's or eat something else. They're eating what the environment gives them, even though they're the ones finding it and preparing it and doing all of that good stuff with their food. So really, you see determinism and possibilism in the cultural landscape, and that's why it's something special that we actually talk about in human geography. Like if it was just talking about one of the two, then it would just be another vocab word. But the combination of all of this stuff that we can see is really important. So examining stimuli, usually pictures, could appear on your AP exam, especially in your multiple choice section. When we talked about the definition of culture a few slides ago, we talked about this culture from India and just looking at all of these different characteristics and complexes of what we see. So let's look at a stimuli. So let's talk about architecture as culture. And I'm also going to talk a tiny bit about religion here because it's just the easiest architecture. Also, I wanted to use emojis, and there aren't a lot of building emojis that are like actually complex besides religious things. So here we have a synagogue. And a synagogue is basically a Jewish place of worship. And you know this because you're seeing this Star of David, which is that cross star pattern right there. And then above the door, which is shaped very uniquely. And this is very clearly a synagogue that Jewish people will worship in. And then when we're looking at architecture here, we're looking at churches. So these are like very simple American churches. If you saw one of those on the side of the road, you'd be like, yes, I know I'm driving through suburbia, rural America. This is the local community church. Like this is where people go to praise God and worship. And like this building is very distinctive. Like I see the stained glass on the windows. I see the wooden doors. I see the cross. Like this is very exactly Christian girl fall, what I'm looking for. Then we also see Islam. So Islam here is you're looking at the one on the left, the black box, I'll talk about in just a second. But the two on the right are just going to be mosques, which is the basic Islamic place of worship. So these mosques are very, you can definitely tell them apart because they usually will have a dome, like onion shaped top, but they will always have these things called minarets. And minarets are basically just those little poles that are next to, but not like directly connected to the mosque. And they basically call out, or I think in Mecca, which is the birthplace of the religion of Islam, and it's where the majority of people there are Muslim. But in Mecca, I think they have like these special instrument or like bugle call things, and that in the religion of Islam, there are 5 times a day that you pray to facing Mecca. And these minarets are made to where like they call out and they tell the whole community, it is time to pray to Allah, and it is time to fulfill one of your 5 pillars of Islam. Which if you haven't learned about this stuff, it is totally okay. And these are just examples of culture. In AP Hug, I don't like to think of religion as its own topic because it's really not, but it's just an example and it's an application of culture that we're talking about in this class. And it's also really great for FRQs because like usually they don't just say, what is this religion? Or like, give me the 5 pillars of Islam, but they'll talk about like, what does this exemplify? And then before I move on and forget this, the Kaaba. No, that's not the name. Oh my gosh, I am pulling a blank and I am human, so I need to use Google. No, not cabbage. Okay, my bad. It is the Kaaba. So basically, it is right here. It is the building at the center of Islam's most prominent mosque, not even going to butcher that, not even going to try, and it is the most sacred site in Islam. Now, fun fact, this did not used to be related to Islam at all. Before 632, when Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, was dead and started the religion of Islam, this was used as a place of worship. This Kaaba was used to worship polytheism, which just means you're worshiping multiple gods. And so they used it to worship like the god of the sun and the god of the sand and the god of etc. So they were worshiping these things here. But Muhammad and his people came in and they were like, no, stop. Cut the cameras. No. There's this thing called Islam, and like God is real, and like we need to worship him here. And everybody else in Mecca like laughed him out of the town, and he was like, no, what are you talking about? Like, Christians are like over there and they're like special. And basically he went over to this town and he went on the Hajj, the Hijra, which is Mecca to Medina. And basically he traveled with his followers to somewhere else to start the religion of Islam in 632 AD. And then he ended up like creating a whole army of people, and he basically took over the Kaaba from the rest of the community of Mecca at the time, and he used it to praise God. And he took out all of I think the like story, I don't know if this is historically confirmed or not, is like he took out all of the figurines of all of these other gods they worship, and he left the box empty to just praise God. So that's your little history lesson for you. I hope you learned something from that today. And the last thing, it's much simpler than everything else I've talked about so far, is a Shinto floating temple. And basically, if you see one of these things, you immediately, or after I say this, you immediately think Japan. You're just like, that just looks like Japan. Like, I can't describe it, but it looks like Japan. And you're right. It's a Shinto floating temple. And basically, Shintoism is the main religion in Japan and has been since like a really long time ago, like since before I was born, since before Muhammad was born. Like it has been the main religion in Japan since the country existed. And like not as like the country of Japan like we know it today, but like as the Edo regime and all of the different what am I thinking of, shogunates. Like Shintoism has been the main religion in Japan for a long time. And so basically, this is just an iconic building that they always use in their floating water temples in Japan to represent Shintoism. So architecture is a really big part of the cultural landscape here. And I think we're about to look at another picture that's just like a non-religious example of architecture, culture, and the cultural landscape. So does anybody in the chat or want to unmute tell me, what does this look like and where do you think it is? And even if you can't tell me that, like, just tell me something that you can figure out about this picture.
Machu Picchu, Peru.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Jason. So this is Machu Picchu, Peru. How did you know that? Was it just like an instinctive thing? Like you've seen this picture before? Like,
yeah, it's a world wonder, I think.
Yes, you're right. It is one of the 7 wonders of the world. 7 wonders of the classical world. Machu Picchu, Peru, in Cusco. So basically, the Inca, I'm sorry, I can pull up the caption here. Let's talk about the Incas in Peru. So basically, Peru was one of the first major settlements of the world. It was one of the 6 first civilized places of the world. And you'll learn about that in Unit 6 when you talk about cities and urbanization. This is kind of important. So the Incas were a people that were very civilized and very developed for their time in like negative 1000 CE. And they built these structures in the mountains that they lived in to adapt to their environment. And they shaped their cultural landscape by making it like this image that we just recognize today. Like we just like know, oh yeah, that's Peru, that's Machu Picchu. Like it's a popular tourist destination. Like, yeah. And we can see all of this intricate architecture inside of these walls going down and around the mountain. And they're really adapting to the land and building off of it. And that's something really important that you can see in the image there. So now let's talk about the growth and decline of cultures. So we've talked about the cultural landscape for a minute, and now let's go back to talking about what is culture and folk versus pop culture. So the growth and decline of cultures. So these are the major concepts of culture that you'll learn before you get into religion, language, identity, ethnicity, race, etc. So first is assimilation, and these are basically 3-word, like very simplified definition, but assimilation basically just means adapt or die. And in no uncertain terms, that's basically what it is. So assimilation is you migrate or you travel from one place to another and you leave behind your home culture and adopt the new culture. So this would be a good example of people from Honduras migrate to the United States and they migrate to, let's pick a random Iowa, and they've just been told you're now a corn farmer. Like you don't make masa and tamales anymore. You are a corn farmer. Syncretism is mixing it up. So this image right here is like, I think that's a crock pot emoji. I don't really know. But basically, the best example of syncretism is America. It's the melting pot. It's where all of the cultures combine, and we're constantly making new cultures and new fashions and new everything. So a good example would be like, I'm really struggling to think of a good example here. So we're combining childhood culture and we're combining technology to where like we have this new culture of like teenagers are always looking at their phones. Like teenagers are always looking at their phones. Like that's just a universal truth, but like that's basically syncretism right there. Acculturation is pick and choose. And this is just a simple way of saying like you keep your home culture, but you're also adapting to some of the culture there just to fit in a little better and also to try to like make new things. So acculturation can lead to syncretism, but they're definitely not the same thing. So my best example of acculturation is Tex-Mex food, because I don't know if you've heard this. I've only repeated it 17 times, but I am from Dallas, Texas, and I love the home state of Texas very dearly. So Tex-Mex food is just a very defining thing about Texas. Like it has an amazing taste and chef's kiss. I mean, it blends good elements of like Texan cuisine and like everything, and it just puts a new spin on Mexican food. It's really good. So here's a little more concepts of culture vocab before we move into some practice multiple choice questions together. So ethnocentrism and nativism. Whoa, how the heck did I say that? Ethnocentrism and nativism. So basically these are just people being like, these are the people who might cause assimilation. So these people only view the world through their one lens, through their culture, and they wouldn't respect any other cultures around them or ones that want to mix with them or adapt to them. They only believe in their culture and they are 100% of the time right. So that's why there's like the finger with the one pointing up, like there's only one correct answer and it is me. Appropriation. So this one you've probably heard of before, cultural appropriation. And basically it's just like you're taking elements of another culture and you're saying, hey, this is mine now. It's not yours, it's mine. And you see this a lot with like Asian cultures and people wearing kimonos and things like that. Cultural appropriation isn't always necessarily bad, but the word just has a very general negative connotation. And the last thing we have here is ethnic enclave. And again, you'll talk about this more in Unit 6. Apparently, we're covering a lot of Unit 6 stuff today. Just touching on like, hey, you'll hear this again. So ethnic enclaves are basically just people from the same culture and from the same ethnicity want to live together. So I think this is actually one of the practice multiple choice questions, so keep this in your back pocket. But ethnic enclaves just exemplify the fact that like you want to live and you want to be surrounded by people who look like you, talk like you, and act like you. So this is where you see things like examples are, if you've seen the musical In the Heights by Lin-Manuel Miranda, the Washington Heights neighborhood of New York City used to be the barrio, which basically just means it's a neighborhood of Hispanic people who all live together, and it was Dominican Republics and Puerto Ricans. Another example is Gayvilles. They're all over the United States in major cities. One in Dallas is called, oh, if I can remember the name, Turtle Creek. And then there's many in San Francisco. There's the Mission District. And then in New York, there is Greenwich Village. And then I'm struggling to think of these because I really have no clue, but it's just a super good example of an ethnic enclave, like people who identify with the same things you identify with and practice the same things you do. You want to be surrounded by them and you want to live by them. You want to be surrounded by them because they're good people according to you. So let's talk about some practice multiple choice questions. And also, wait, actually, before I move on, I will take like any open questions right now from you guys. Any questions at all about Unit 3 or anything else in AP Hug?
Yeah, I have a question. So for Hindu and Buddhist buildings, they seem kind of similar in a way. Like, are there any distinctions that can separate the two?
Okay, I'm going to pull up some pictures real quick. But the main thing is just like Hinduist architecture is very similar to Buddhism because if you ever take world history AP, you'll learn about this. But Buddhism and Hinduism both originated in India, and with trade routes, they ended up mainly being south and southern of India and Southeast Asia, especially in islands. But Hinduism did remain in India. Buddhism got pushed to the north to China a little bit and got pushed southeast to the islands. So a big thing with Buddhist architecture is there will always be a Buddha there. Like, if that's not necessarily true, I'm so sorry, but like every time that you see Buddhist architecture and you're asked to like see what it is, there will always be a Buddha there. Like right here, this big gold bronze one. You can see that around I don't know if you can see it because I'm not zoomed in enough, but there are baby Buddhas around the edges of the building. And then if we look for more Buddhist architecture here, we can see, oh, perfect, the Buddha right there. Buddhism also uses a lot of gold and bronze because it's really about the religion of Buddhism, which you'll learn about more in the middle way. And they live basically, they try to be middle class and they try not to be the richest and they try not to be whatever. They try not to be poor. They try to live the middle way. Also in Northern Buddhism, so like in around China and stuff, you'll see a lot of things like pagodas. And that's going to be representative of Buddhism. But then in more Southeastern Asian, you'll see more things like this. Buddhist treasures is what they're called. And this picture is titled Harmony Between Hinduism and Buddhist Architecture. Like, there's a ton of similarities. So like, it's not bad that you can't identify the differences between them, but it's just something. Gold and bronze and like the smaller pagodas are definitely representative of Southeast Asian architecture. And then so here with Hindu architecture, we see a lot more like they're built out of stone and brick, and yeah, there's not really a lot of defining features of Hindu architecture. This tries to break it down, but that's something really complicated that you don't need to learn. I mean, you can look it up if you want to, just Google Hinduism architecture and it'll pop up. But mainly it's just knowing Buddhist architecture. This is also Angkor Wat. And fun fact, the most prominent like religious like temple right now, Angkor Wat right here, this was built in Cambodia as a Hindu temple, as a Hindu place of worship, but is now actually a Buddhist place of worship. Why? Well, it's because of the history behind it. So basically when people from India and the South Asia subcontinent migrated and traded in Southeast Asia and started establishing islands there around 1400s, 1500s, they brought their religions with them. And a lot of traders spread religions of Hinduism and Buddhism. And these islands really they really adopted them like with full force. And they combined it a lot too with syncretism, like we just talked about. So you'll see a lot of things that were Buddhist or were Hinduist are now the opposite, just because those are the people who live there now. So they're the ones who get to choose what it represents. Great question. Anything else?
I also have another question for review books. Are there any that you recommend? And you recommend getting the latest version, or is an older version okay as well?
Okay. So there is one book that I love. I actually do not know where my human geography edition is, but I swear by this book, and it's ASAP. These books are like not thick. They're like about $10, I think, on Amazon, but basically if you look at it, it basically breaks down everything in like a really graphical format, and like it makes it easy to understand. Like it has a lot of pictures, and it's not like complicated textbook language. It doesn't have a ton of examples that you don't need to know, but it's something that I really like about it. And I think it's more in the A+ one, but like on different pages, it'll have these different symbols. And this one means like, this is useful to know, but you don't need to know for your exam. And then there's one with like 2 bullet points right here. That's like, you need to know this for your exam, or like, you're not going to do well. And then there's one with 2 bullet points that's just like, if you don't know this, like, what are you doing taking this class? Like, it's a joke, but like, and then these 3 dots are like, this is useful information. And it could be like extra points for an FRQ, but it's not going to be like explicitly tested. So I don't know where my human geography copy is. It's somewhere in my bookcase down here, which is not really a bookcase. It's just like a basket of books. But yeah, that's totally what I recommend.
All right, thank you.
Anything else? Hannah?
No, I'm good right now. We're currently working on religion this week because my class is only a semester long, so we're like in the middle of Unit 3.
Your class is gonna have to like be fast through units
Yeah.
5, 6, and 7, and those are like the hardest units.
Yeah, because just for this school year, we switched to like a 4x4 schedule where we take
Okay, yeah.
fall and 4 in the spring. Because we're online, they were like, oh, it'll be easier. Well, it's not really when you're taking AP classes, so you have to cram the whole thing. I feel really bad for the people taking AP US history. Like,
Yeah, that
I
sucks.
could not imagine doing that.
Hi, Daya, welcome. I'm taking Q&A now, and we're about to look at some practice MCQs for Unit 3 stuff. Dia, oh, I'm so sorry, Dia. My bad. Thank you for correcting me in the chat. Amazing. Any questions before we look at some practice multiple choice? Anyone? Nope. Okay, I got 2 notes in the chat. That's a super majority. Moving on. Okay. So as we went through these slides, I will link them on the AP Hug Students Hub, which I'll put a link to in the chat. And then I'm also going to put them in the community channel. So basically, 2 things going in the chat right now. The first one is the Students Hub, which will have a link to where you can join the community. And you can also grab all of the resources that I use there. And I also have all the past live stream links, and I have all of the info from today, and also a lot of other AP Human Geography resources that just go there. So I recommend bookmarking that and joining the community whenever you get the link. So practice multiple choice, yay. I know we've looked at FRQs recently for Unit 2, but I think multiple choice is pretty important too, because it's like half your score. So practice multiple choice. So 1, genes provide a good example of material culture that is adopted by a number of different societies. They're an example of what? Oh, I already have an answer in the chat. Too quick for me to open it. Okay, I have an answer. You can send it to me in the private chat, or you can, yeah, actually have the thing only set to private chat. Okay, perfect. I see 2 Bs, and I definitely agree. I definitely agree that genes are an example of pop culture. Now, if I could only do this to where I didn't have to, you know what, we'll go over it. But yes, B is the correct answer. So now, in contrast to folk culture, number 2, popular culture is more likely to vary what? Anybody have any answers in the chat? Okay, perfect. I've got 2. Woo, okay, so I have 3 contrasting answers, so we're definitely going to talk about this one real quick. So the correct answer is actually B. Wow. So 1 person got it. So D and E are out because we're done with that. So popular culture is more likely to vary what? From place to place at a given time, from time to time at a given time, or both from place to place and from time to time and equal. So this question is worded pretty weirdly, but the thing here is you just have to think about like what is examples of everything. So pop culture is oh, okay, no problem. You just read it wrong. Not a big deal. This is literally practice. I'm not grading you on anything. So popular culture is definitely likely to vary from time to time in a given place, because the fall girl Christian, like pop culture, like those trends, they're not going to take place in the spring or the summer. Like they're only going to take place at that certain time. And like while it might look a little different, like fall girl, Christian girl fall, like people might be wearing Ugg boots and like Patagonia sweaters and stuff, and like New York, like in Florida, you might not have it to the same extent, but people are still going to be reminiscent of that same concept. So I can see where you both got A and C from, but the answer here is actually B. If we all understand that, and I don't see anything in the chat, I will read question 3 to you and give you a second to answer. 3, judging from discussions of other clothing in this chapter, we could say that hoodies are an example of blank adopted by a number of different groups segmented by age, class, ethnicity, and other factors. Hoodies are a versatile element of popular culture. So they're an example of what culture? Now, don't think too hard on this question and just pick the one that's like, oh, yeah, okay, this question is too easy. Okay, got 2 answers. I'll wait for one more, or I'll wait 5 more seconds, whichever one comes first. Perfect. I have all 3 answers, and you all got it correct. Congratulations. It is B, material culture. So basically, jeans are a thing I can touch, I can feel. They are something that I can put on my body and wear. They are definitely material culture. It says that they're pop culture in the question, so youth, folk, and punk are out because they're all just debating that one concept. And then D, immaterial culture, that's just the opposite of the correct answer. And basically immaterial culture is things like religion, oral traditions, things that you can't touch and feel and see and do all of those wonderful things with. So last one before I'm going to talk about the next 2 and just work through them myself. 4, folk songs are more likely than pop songs to blank. Ooh, I already have 2 answers in the chat. Okay, I have all 3 answers, and actually you guys are all correct. You seemed a little bit unsure of your answers, like I saw a few question marks, so I'll talk about it for a second. But yes, the correct answer is A. And I'm going to move to the next slide so you can see the key. And we got them all correct. Congratulations, y'all. So for number 4, so folk songs are more likely than pop songs too. I'm going to work from the bottom up. Be written by specialists for commercial distributions. So that's like the opposite. Like opposite. So D, be transmitted in written form. So an important thing here is when I talk about immaterial culture like 30 seconds ago, I mentioned oral traditions, and that's really important because folk culture doesn't necessarily write a lot of things down. They have a lot of oral traditions that are just like remembered and passed down through generations, like thousands of stories, hundreds of stories. What's the lyric? I told you hundreds of stories that will create you and I. So that's a really I think it's a Mexican proverb, something like that I can't remember right now. But yes, it's the opposite. C, feature instruments and style and performance associated with dance club. And definitely the opposite. B, be considered examples of culture. So when we're talking about folk culture versus popular culture, they're both culture. One of them is not less culture than the other. So all we're left with is A, just basically by process of elimination. So you guys can put this in the chat, but I'm going to work through it with you. So diffusion of popular customs can adversely impact environmental quality in 2 ways. So here we're talking about diffusion, pop culture, and the cultural landscape. So that is all 3 things that we talked about today. So what is diffusion of popular customs can adversely impact environmental quality in 2 ways? I'm not going to check the chat right now, but I see that somebody's submitting an answer. So 7. So is it A, reducing demand for foreign products and promoting local crafts? Well, I don't think that's really answering the question because it's not talking about like customs. So maybe, but probably not. So B would be increased diversity and resource and decreased demand. Well, with more people in pop culture, because pop culture is large by definition, it's going to have an increased demand. So let's not choose B. And then C, depletion of scarce resources and pollution. That sounds pretty okay, or at least correct to me. I mean, there are a lot of people, so we need a lot of resources like water and food and like pollution. A lot of people live in urban centers, so let's keep that one, but keep looking to see if anything's better. Diversity of products and depletion of change. So the second one here is really important, even if you don't know what diversity of products means in this context. Depletion of change is like things don't change and things always stay the same. And that's the opposite of what pop culture does. E, using renewable materials and recycled designs. So this is a very really recent pop culture trend here that you're seeing, using renewable, and that's like just a trendy thing. But diffusion of popular customs, I think that C is a better answer than E. So let's check the answer key and see that it is C. E is like a good answer, but like C is the most correct answer. And I'm sure you've heard teachers before say like, look, choose the best answer, not choose the correct answer, choose the best answer, because C is just stronger than E. Like I could back up C with a lot more stuff and say like, we've been doing this for hundreds of years now, as opposed to E, which is only like a really recent trend in popular culture. So last practice MCQ. So we did 1, 2, 3, 4, then we skipped to 7, then we skipped to 27. Good job with your counting, Harrison. So an examination of the distribution of ethnicities in the United States reveals. I actually want you guys to answer this one. So I'll give you a second to type it in the chat. I'll see how you do. I just realized I didn't talk about one of these things, but let's see if you guys can get it anyways. I think you're smart. Okay, let's see what you guys have in the chat. I have E, E, and E. And I think that I agree. Good job, guys. So I didn't talk about urban areas, so oopsies. Oopsies, oopsies, oopsies. But I hope you were able to use process of elimination to say that E is the correct answer here. Yay, everybody got this one right. So basically A, that's just like a really weird thing to say. Like, even though we haven't talked about it, like why all people are clustered in urban areas in each US region. So that's just like really general, and like the answer choice doesn't make sense. These like different ethnicities cluster in each US region. Like, what are the US regions? Ethnic neighborhoods contain a heterogeneous mix of ethnicities, even in cities, blah, 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 blah. Segregation, it's homogenous. People want to live with people who act like them, who speak like them, who act like them, who think like them. There we go. That's the word I was thinking of. D, segregation and exclusion are a thing of the past for nearly all US ethnic group. Well, when we get to Unit 6, we're going to talk about why this is not true because of neo-colonialism and neo-segregation. And then we're left with E. So, any last minute Unit 3 questions here that I can cover? If not, then I think we're going to end 10 minutes early, which is a new record for me. Usually I go over. Also, it's miraculous, knock on wood, that we haven't had a tech support issue in today's stream. Okay, no problem. I can wait. Do you know where we can find any MCQs online? That is actually a very great question, and let's look together. So I love the website that is known as google.com because it's good for all these things. AP Hug, MCQ practice. I'm going to say MCQ practice by unit just because. Okay. Hey, I wrote that. AP Hug MCQ questions. That's me. That's me right there. So when you Google AP Hug MCQ practice, I'm the first thing that comes up. So I should always be in the back of your mind. So every AP Hug practice test, no. So you also have to kind of like sift through these things and be like, I don't want that. I don't want that. This looks like a good website to look at. Okay, let's see here. FRQs, practice MC and FRQ questions. Here we go. So I think I'll link this site in the AP Hug Students Hub, but this looks like some good practice questions here. They don't seem to be multiple. Oh, here they are. So like here are the multiple choice and FRQ questions. So those are all the FRQs, and then these are all of the multiple choice questions down here. So I am going to go put this in the AP Hug Students Hub right now. The link to this, so if you ever need it, you can look. Okay, Dia, I will answer your question in just a second once I put this. So it's going to be under study plans and resources, and this will be the first bookmark right here at the top. Boom. Okay, just some practice FRQ and practice MCQ by unit, also just like some study guide review questions so you can Google if you don't know the answers. Let's see, can I find any MCQ practice here? Oh, perfect. If this breaks it down by unit, then I will link it in the student hub. Yes, it does. Okay. So if you look on this page, Wharton Social Studies, which I will also link here, they have some practice MCQs by unit, but you have to download the whole Word doc, and you also have to download the keys separately, so just be aware. Okay, perfect. So there are some practice MCQs, and now I'm being asked to talk about language families and lingua franca. So lingua franca is the easiest thing to talk about right now. I wish I had a visual to go with this, but I'll just put up the Q&A. So lingua franca is basically just the language done for business. Wait, the language that's used for business done. So basically when I do like a transaction, like if I travel from the US to China, my lingua franca is likely going to be Mandarin because like people in China want me to speak Mandarin to do a business deal with them. And so basically it's just a language used for trade. With lingua franca, you'll often see pidgin languages. So if I go to Mexico from Texas and I do a trade deal there, I might be speaking in like some form of Spanglish, which is just Spanish and English. Like it's an informal language, like that kind of combines the two because like I don't know Spanish that well and the other person doesn't know English that well. So like we kind of mix our languages and just see what happens. Kind of funny, but it's true and it happens all the time. So with language families, okay, pidgin languages evolve into Creole languages if they become more formal, right? Yes, kind of yes, kind of maybe. So basically, pidgin languages don't usually evolve, but like if you think about levels of formality, it's pidgin languages are the least formal. Creole languages are a thing, and there's literally a language called Creole, which is why they're called Creole languages. And formal languages are just real things. So like it's each step above. And really, languages could evolve that way. And we see like Canadian French used to be a pidgin language, and now I guess you can call it a Creole language, and maybe it could become a formal language in the future because that's just slightly different from real French. So yes, and also yes. 1 second, please, and I'll answer your language family question with a visual. So I think I'm just going to use a language tree here, but Swahili, no, Swahili would be a formal language, I think, unless I'm wrong. Yeah, okay, so it's a spoken language. It has a writing system, so unless I'm just very wrong, then it should be a formal language. The best way to talk about language families is by looking at the language tree. Okay, so basically it's a really high resolution image, so I'll open it up in another tab. Okay, so basically when we're looking at the language tree here, we're looking at language families as being these big overarching branches. So we can see Germanic, Romance, Slavic, Albanian, Celtic, Indic, Indo-Aryan, Iranian, and we can see all of these different language families that like encompass all the languages. And you can see the biggest branches have like the most speakers. So this is only Indo-European languages, and there's actually more speakers of the Mandarin language, which is not included in this part of the language tree, the Uralic language family. I'm sorry, the Uralic language group. And so basically you're looking at this just saying like, yes, languages adapt and are created from other languages. So in history, we see like English came from an Anglo-Saxon language that's like really kind of German, and then it's now English, and it's a West Germanic language. And we see like Spanish and French and Italian are related because they all have like really similar verb tenses and things like that we can still see today. Like they evolved from Latin, all of those cool things, and like Russian and Ukrainian and Polish and Czech are all really similar. And this is like a really broken down linguistics thing you don't need to know a ton about, but like, yes. Arab speaking merchants and Bantu speaking residents would so would it be considered a I'm gonna be honest, Dia, I don't know the answer to your question because for everybody who can't see it, I'll copy paste it. So Dia's question that I'm about to research is, okay, so Arab-speaking merchants and Bantu-speaking residents. So would it be considered a Creole language or a formal language, Swahili? So, so it was created if I remember correctly, I'm gonna have to do some research here, but Arab-speaking merchants and Bantu-speaking residents. So it was created as a combination of the two languages, if I remember correctly. But so it used to just be a lingua franca, but let's see. Swahili did evolve as a Creole language, but I think that it's such a popular language today, and it's spoken by enough people, and it has a written language and it has a spoken language, that it's now a formal language. If there's like a textbook that's saying something different, like listen to that and not me, because like obviously I am not as smart as a textbook, but you know, that's my opinion on the matter. Yes, like saying something went through language evolutions is just like it's just an interesting concept, but like, yes, but also kinda. Yes, very interesting term. Okay, anything else that I can help with? Let's put it back to my Q&A graphic. Okay, doesn't look like anyone else has any questions, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to come back on and say adios. We will be reviewing Unit 3 next week. I think next week I'm going to talk about, I don't know if next week I'll talk about, I think I'll talk about diffusion and probably, I'm going to talk about diffusion, either like religion or language. AMSCO chapter 8, yes, I can look up that and see what that is and just make sure we're all set on that. And then Jason, what was the best resource that you used to study? TBH, like this is not just a shameless plug, like actually go to the AP Hug students, like fivable.me-ap-hug. And this is like the big Fivable site that has like all of our resources. And if you want to read something, just look at like the text, like the study guides and blog posts, and you can look at review videos from last year. You can play trivia games to practice, but I definitely recommend looking at the study guides at least. It's also linked in the Students Hub, but that's like a more informal thing where I just post stuff that I like and the info about our live streams and stuff like that. Okay, 1 second, I see a message in the chat. Okay. Amazing. Thank you guys so much for coming, and I will see you next week. Adios.
Bye.